Oh, welcome to Tom Talk. This one, for those of you, and I think probably most of you have seen one or more Tom Talks before, this one's a little bit different. We're taking on a subject that's a bit different also. It's what are we conserving and why are we conserving it, which is sounds like a very big topic, and it is. And so this only introduces some ideas that have been working over in my mind for about 15 years. So what we're going to do is there'll be five short skits, and they're sort of animated. Um, and we're going to go through a skit, and then we'll pause for a while, and you can ask questions. I hope you ask questions. I'm trying to challenge you with some ideas you may not have heard before. Um, and so we'll progress through the presentation in that way. Uh, I uh, I think we're basically ready to go, Jackie. I don't think we really need any more introduction than that.
Sounds good. I'll share my screen now. All right, you should be seeing it now. So I will start the video.
Hey, Robin, what's with the snail?
That's our new intern, Pat. Good to have you on board. What are we going to talk about today, Grog?
We got some big questions to answer today, like what is nature? How does nature change? And finally, what's a good prairie? It's a Tom Talk.
Tom Talk? Who is this Tom guy anyways?
I think he works here.
If you call inventing a talking snail work.
Sounds like he wants us to do his job for him.
Take it easy, Robin. We're just figments of his imagination.
I met a dinosaur in his imagination the other day. Freaky!
All right, first things first. What do you mean by the word nature?
Good question. That word is used in so many ways. For instance, human nature is very different from nature as in a particular patch of forest, or the nature of a physicist. The terms natural and normal also tend to get all confused.
Like a snail climbing a normal curve isn't natural.
Let's keep it simple and focus on land conservation today. Land refers to a particular place and time and to all the living and non-living things contained there. Also, every bit of land is always a part of the whole world around it, and land always has a history. Land can be conserved or wasted. Nature is simply an idea that means many things to many people.
Part and whole. I like it. Embracing ambiguity, just like us land snails, are both male and female. I mean, we're not one or the other, but both. Maybe nature is so hard to define because we're trying to find an other that isn't us. But every time we find it, we find we're already there.
Smart snail.
So conservation means holding on to the land, species, and processes like fire that link them all together, all of which we've inherited from the past.
Question 2. Why do we need to conserve land?
Tough one. That's going to be an uphill climb, I fear.
There are two ways to think about that question. First, if we think a prairie is valuable, why would we need to protect it beyond building a fence around it?
Why not let nature take its course, like a snail being a snail and crawling on a leaf?
Yeah, why do people need to get involved? It's nature after all.
Second, why do we think a prairie is valuable?
I like that one. Let's take the second question first. It seems the most important.
Okay, that was the first question. It's really basically a setup. I don't guess I expect a whole lot of questions with that one, but basically what I was trying to do with that first skit was the word nature is almost inescapable. We use it all the time when we talk about what we do. All of you are involved in conservation in one way or another. And that word nature just becomes a sort of easy thing to slip into conversation in any number of different ways. But it's very much a cultural idea. It's a way that we're trying to talk about something other than ourselves. And um, so as we go through this presentation today, I want you to think about, keep thinking about that word nature and how it either helps or hurts our ability to talk about the purposes and the goals of conservation. Let's go to the second. If we don't have any questions, let's go to the second skit, Jackie.
You got it. What is the value of a prairie anyway? It must have some worth, right? I mean, if we keep it as a prairie, we can't live in it, build on it, or grow food on it, so what good is it? Is it valuable because it stores carbon in the soil, provides pollinator habitat? Maybe it's something like preventing floods because it stores water, or some pharmaceutical value from the chemicals found in the plants?
Well asked, Robin. You have a way with words.
The values you mention are usually called ecosystem services. Unfortunately, I don't think they're as effective as they're usually given credit for.
Why not? Plants need pollinators to make the foods we eat, right?
Well, the argument that we need diverse and abundant populations of native pollinating insects to support our food supplies, it really doesn't make sense when you consider that almost all modern landscapes in the Midwest have lost nearly all of their original biodiversity, yet grocery stores are stacked to the ceiling with food. And if on occasion we need more pollinators, we simply carry honeybees from field to field in trailers to pollinate crops. Once we turn pollinators into instruments of production, we turn an ecological problem into a business opportunity.
Wait a minute, so we don't need prairies?
I didn't say that. We should conserve both pollinators and prairies.
It's the right thing to do.
Exactly, but it's not the economically efficient thing to do.
How could it not be efficient? The prairie supplies the pollinators for free.
Well, it's not actually free. If you keep 10% of the land in a diverse prairie to supply the other 90% of cropland with pollinators, that's 10% that doesn't produce a crop.
How about storing carbon?
There again, given the climate crisis, storing carbon in trees and soil is important, but diverse prairies are an inefficient way if you want the most carbon sequestration possible.
Efficiency raises its ugly head again.
Prairies store and hold carbon better than farm fields, but if we devised a mix of plants for the sole purpose of efficient carbon sequestration, it's unlikely to look much like a prairie. Prairies didn't evolve to store carbon for our benefit, but only to survive and reproduce. More likely, the result would be a mix of aggressive grasses and forbs from around the world, chosen for that purpose alone.
Sounds like a bad idea to me, but then I'm only an intern.
What about water? Doesn't turning a cornfield into prairie reduce flooding downstream?
You're right there, Robin. Removing drain tiles and restoring a prairie allows the land to store more water and release it more slowly, which reduces flooding. In addition, restoring meanders and riffles in streams reduces the amount of sediment that flows from a straight drainage ditch right into our rivers and lakes.
So conservation does pay for itself. The ecosystem services argument works after all.
Well, it depends on what you mean by work. The problem is that a wetland stores the same amount of water whether it's full of native wetland plants or invasive weeds. Only certain aspects of conservation result in services to nearby communities of people.
I guess the real answer is yes and no.
The difficult task of protecting and restoring the diversity of life is hard to justify using ecosystem services arguments alone. We're trying to reach a diverse and historically relevant goal by a very narrow, exclusive line of thinking.
So ecosystem services are among the benefits, but not the main reason that we conserve.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
What about pharmaceutical value? Isn't there a chance that we could find the cure for some disease among the chemicals found in the diversity of plants in a prairie?
Have you got anything for a headache? I know. I'll go chew on some willow bark.
The likelihood of finding a cure for cancer in the next fragment of prairie is vanishingly small, and economically speaking, you could make a lot more money planting corn or selling land to the developer. After all, it's not the value of all prairies that's important, but the value of the next acre of prairie.
Why is that?
Because only the value of the next acre will save that acre from destruction.
So we risk losing the prairie, 1 acre at a time.
And if you found a miracle plant, then your incentive is only to save the species rather than the prairie in which it was found. Altogether, the pharmaceutical argument is not a very good formula for conservation.
There's that market reasoning again.
And if that isn't enough, once a valuable chemical is found in a plant, we will soon find ways to synthesize it, rendering the species effectively worthless.
Did you know that using high output screening, labs can test up to 100,000 chemicals per day?
I get it already.
I think Robin was asking for it.
You make it seem like prairies are worthless.
I think you actually mean useless, Robin. And maybe it's the using part that's the problem.
Prairies have a great value, but we make them worth much less when we transform them into carbon storage tanks, drug warehouses, and honeybee meadows. These arguments only work to save resources, not to save the place and its wonderful diversity of life. As soon as we reduce the prairie to resources, we discover that many of the details and minor species and relationships are in fact not at all useful.
I'd give you a high five, Grog. But I've got no fingers. How about a high slime?
But even if protecting ecosystem services doesn't conserve the beauty and diversity of life, it's still a good thing.
Of course, you're right, Robin. Managing resources in a sustainable fashion is very important for society, but managing land for its useful bits alone is not the same as conserving and restoring its diversity of life.
And I'm part of the diversity of life.
And another, even more important thing, no one becomes a conservationist to assure the pollination of food crops, cure cancer, or sequester carbon. They become conservationists because they fall in love with animals and plants and forests and streams. That love is the essential resource that makes conservation run. Love is enough to commit ourselves to failing friends, and it's enough to conserve the beauty and diversity of life.
Well said, Grog. I think you've made a good moral argument for conservation. Good enough for me, anyways.
Right on, Grog.
Oh, someone must have a question about that one. Because I know we've all used those arguments before. At least I've heard them innumerable times over the last 10 years.
Has anybody found themselves relying completely on the ecosystem services argument out there? I know we're asked to do that a lot.
And my point here is not that there isn't any truth in a services argument. It's that it's an argument from the wrong point of view. And that if you look at the world as a money-making venture, then you're not going to get around to conserving. I mean, I just used the phrase conserving the beauty and diversity of life, and by that I mean the historical beauty and diversity of life of a place. You just can't get there with a narrow economic line of thinking. And all services arguments are basically with what you call them services. They're economically valuable services. And once you've reduced the argument for conservation to that, you really can't get to that historically relevant diversity of life that we're all interested in. I know all of you are interested in when we're doing conservation work.
And I asked the group if you can put it in the chat, what is the top reason for you that you conserve? Why are you here? And if you want to write that in the chat, again, that's at the top middle part of the screen, that little chat icon you can type in and hit enter. As I would guess, we probably have a variety of answers, even just within our little group here. I know we're putting you on the spot earlier than we normally would in a regular presentation, but I see some typing, so I'm filling time.
Jackie, can you repeat your last question or statement again?
Yes.
Thank you.
Why do you conserve? What's your personal reason for being in conservation?
For me, this is Christine, and I have Dimitri online too. I don't know if he'll speak on this, but I'll speak for myself. I have a good feeling anytime I'm in nature. So it's an emotional connection for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have some folks in the chat too said, I think it's both ecosystem services and the diversity of life. So the loss of habitat is an important thing to deal with. I had another person that shared it's theological for them. Creation deserves respect and care because it preceded us and supports us. Another person shared they want to do what they can to help the native plants and animals survive the assault on their habitat. So all of these are very, very good reasons. Was there one more out there? If somebody unmuted, I don't apologize if I interrupted you.
I mean, I don't think there are any. Well, I can't. Maybe I could imagine bad reasons, but I don't. But yeah, I think all these reasons and probably many others are good reasons. But my question to you, and I will get to at least my own personal answer to this question, is what is the basis for moving conservation forward? Uh, how do these reasons, how can we make these reasons public and a reason for growing conservation to many times the size it is at present? I think that's the question that's really troubled me for a very long time, and that's really what I wanted this presentation to be about today. So let's move on to the next skit, Jackie.
Alrighty.
Next question, why can't nature recover? Why can't we just build a fence around a prairie to protect it?
Why is life always so hard?
It turns out we need to engage with the prairie to conserve it.
But why would nature need us?
Remember, we decided to use the term land instead of nature. Nature excludes people, hence the opposition of nature and culture. We go outside to visit nature and then return inside to the confines of home and office. However, people have lived with land for hundreds of thousands of years.
Land and people. It's a part and whole thing again. Maybe we need each other.
Back to whether land can recover if we protect it. Imagine it's 500 years ago and we're looking at a single acre of prairie.
43,560 square feet. I'm on it.
It's surrounded by thousands of acres of prairie.
Even better, there were 21,477,120 acres of prairie in Illinois back then.
Now destroy that first acre. What happens?
I'm glad this is just a thought experiment.
Well, it turns back into a prairie because it's surrounded by prairie and bombarded by prairie seeds and animals and fire.
Seems reasonable.
Imagine the same acre of prairie, only it survived to the present day, and it's now surrounded by suburban landscapes complete with shopping malls and roads. If we destroy that prairie, what happens now?
Poor little prairie.
It turns back into a prairie? After all, that's what it was to start with.
Wrong. This time it accumulates plants and animals from the developed landscape around it, and it turns into a field of weeds. In fact, it does that whether it's disturbed or not, because it's now isolated from the prairie world it once inhabited.
Interesting. What's your point?
That it had no more natural tendency to be a prairie than it did to be a weed field. In both cases, it simply turned into a version of its surroundings.
So you're telling me that land, can't recover?
If you think that land recovered in the first example, then you need to accept that it recovered in the second, even though it became a field of weeds instead of a prairie. In both cases, the acre had no direction of its own, rather it was only transformed by its surroundings.
It's all about relationships.
The changing landscape doesn't have any universal process or goal to go back to its past. It doesn't want to recover, so we can't help it recover. Time always moves forward.
I already feel older than when we started today.
But isn't it discouraging for those of us that want to believe that forests and prairies want to recover? That's part of the reason we try to conserve them.
I think the real story is more exciting and inspiring. It highlights the central role of conservationists today in saving what little is left of a diversity of life that is fast disappearing. I think it's the truest and best argument for conservation and the one most likely to convince others to join us. Right. That's
What this is a way of looking at what is our role? What is our role as people? And I've heard that phrase "helping nature to recover" for decades. It's in the Society for Ecological Restoration's primer on ecological restoration, and it's always grated on me because it's if it wasn't that restoration isn't our decision, that somehow we're just going along with what nature wants to do anyway. And there's no real sense to that in my mind. If we don't do anything, prairies don't recover. It's not that they don't recover quickly. They don't recover at all. They just slowly disappear. And that's the same with most other or all other, fragments, what we call remnant fragments of a natural landscape that existed many centuries ago. Those that survive into the present have already degraded to some extent, some more than others. And if we don't do anything for another few centuries, they'll disappear completely. They don't have any intent or any embodied sort of direction of where they're going. They're simply collapsing. They're being overwhelmed by the world around it, and eventually they disappear. So it's up to us as conservationists to see that as something that needs to be resisted. That's what ecological restoration is. It's about valuing that past diversity of life and then acting to help preserve it and restore it, and putting our role first is simply being honest about who we are as conservationists and why we do it. Um, um, let me see if I've got any other.
I had one more comment in the chat from our last question about, why do you personally conserve nature? And this was, they're trying hard to teach their children the importance of these trees that we're so blessed to have and the many native plants that are multiplying each year. I think that's a good one too.
Yeah, very much.
I think it would be helpful too for before this next video, we're going to talk about what is a good prairie. So take a few seconds to type in the chat, what do you think makes a good prairie? And what does it look like? What does it feel like? And whenever you would like, Tom, I can start reading. Oh, we got buggy. That's a good one. I like that. Got some folks typing. There's a diversity of plants and animals, especially the bugs, according to the first comment.
Okay.
Got a few more folks typing.
Again, I think the personal connection, there'll be a lot of different answers to this. And I think it's all of them are good answers. But there's one sort of answer that we tend to use all the time as managers and as ecological restorationists. And let's see how that one pans out in our next skit.
Mm-hmm. A few folks say it depends where it is. What is a good prairie depends where it is. A diverse place, something that is close to what it was before we disturbed it. A place that's biodiverse, mostly free of non-native invasive species, with most of its native pre-settlement species remaining, and has healthy hydrology. Yeah, all excellent answers.
Complete, yes. Give that person a job, yeah.
Recognize our plant monitors as we get these answers. All right, are you ready for the next skit to start?
Think so, yes.
Okay. I guess my next question is, when do we know when we get there? To the end, I mean. We can't go back to visit prairies 500 years ago, so how do we know what a good prairie is? At some point, isn't it all subjective?
Who's a good snail? I'm a good snail.
We choose to conserve the beauty and diversity of life of a place, which is subjective, but the landscape 500 years ago doesn't change depending on our choices. The prairie is part of the past, so it's not like we simply are choosing to conserve flowers because we like red ones or yellow ones.
So we're making a moral choice to protect and restore the prairie, not an aesthetic choice. But what if the two communities of people had two different ideas of what the prairie was and should be?
Is it a really bad thing if no one knows the absolute truth?
I agree with Snail. In this case, taking two different paths may help us learn.
But even the most general goal seems quite arbitrary to me. For instance, why did you choose 500 years ago and not another time?
Time, never enough time. Always in a hurry.
The choice of time isn't random. The pre-European settlement time period is relevant because it brings our society's collective impact on the landscape into clear focus. For instance, fossil pollen records show that prairies and oak savannas dominated the vegetation for many thousands of years until relatively recently. So what seems like a narrow choice isn't really narrow at all.
Okay, but how do we know which prairies today are good? Or should I say, more like the prairies of 500 years ago?
We can't exactly measure their goodness with the magic ruler or go back in time to look.
What we can do is examine many remnant prairies to better understand the plant species that occur on those sites. The rare species that occur only in a few remnants are judged most conservative, and the prairies that contain the most of these conservative species are the best remnants. One goes back and forth between species and prairies until one has a ranking of species from most to least conservative and a ranking of prairies from least disturbed to most disturbed.
Aren't you going around in circles?
Snails prefer spirals to circles. Round and round till we get to the center.
Well, if you stop to think about it, there's no other way to judge the prairiness of a prairie, its quality, without going back and forth between the species and the community, the part and the whole.
There's the part and whole again.
There's actually a fancy term for that circular reasoning from part to whole. It's called the hermeneutic circle. That term comes from how people try to interpret text. For example, the Bible, by understanding each passage in light of the whole book and revisiting their understanding of the book with a new insight into the next passage. In the case of prairies, the more you look at them, the more you understand the affinity of certain species for high-quality areas versus sites that are degraded. Yet high-quality areas are in part considered that way due to the species that are present.
This sounds complicated. Why can't we just focus on something simple and measurable?
Part of the reason it's hard to grasp is that we live in a culture that wants to add up simple facts to reach big ideas. Much of the basic sciences focuses on individual pieces and processes, like how physicists understand mass and energy and velocity, but the interpretive circle is more useful for understanding complicated things that require judgment.
Like the meaning of life, there must be one after all, said a single, simple snail hanging upside down from a normal curve.
Let's look at an example of the interpretive circle. When researchers want to measure human intelligence, they first need to consider the enormous range of human thought and creativity, and then distill from that an idea of what intelligent thinking and behavior might be. Last, they create a test to measure that intelligence.
I hate tests.
Me too.
They give that test to a large group of people and look for trends. The people who get lots of questions right are the only ones to get certain questions right, and the people who get lots of questions wrong tend to get only certain questions right. So only a subset of questions becomes most important for the final score.
I think I flunked. I'm a failed snail.
Then we scale the test score such that 100 is average. People with a score below 100 are considered below average in intelligence, and people who score above 100 are considered above average in intelligence. A sophisticated version of this is what we call an IQ test, which stands for Intelligence Quotient.
But the people who make the test seem to have the final say on what is or isn't important to human intelligence.
Yeah, what do they know about being a snail?
We must assume that a group of experts will get the questions right after a few tries.
But if cavemen or women took the test, they wouldn't do very well. What's important in their life would be very different from my life, for example. And if cave people wrote the test, then modern people like me would flunk.
Or if a snail made the test, only snails would pass. How can you measure something when you don't know exactly what it is?
So our judgments of who's considered smart and who's not are always biased by the world we grew up in?
Exactly. In the case of the IQ test, people seem to think it measures something useful. Useful, that is, to a society that uses the people who take the test.
It seems to miss a lot of what it means to be a functioning human being.
Or a snail.
Probably does, Robin. It depends on whether you think we need an efficient way to categorize people or not. Because once you develop a test, you step outside of the circle of interpretation and simply score more and more people using the same test.
What does this have to do with whether one plant species or one site is better or worse than another?
Prairie has certain species and not others, just as a person gets some questions right and not others. A person is analogous to the prairie, and a test question to the species. We rate people from high to low intelligence just as we rate prairies from high to low quality. And we order questions from difficult to easy just as we order species from conservative to weedy. We go back and forth between ordering prairies and species until the two judgments support one another, just as you go back and forth between ordering people and questions.
I'm getting lost in all the multidimensionality.
I think I follow, but it still has the same problem. The order is decided by the people who came up with the test.
Well, you're right. We're back to the hermeneutic circle. Interpretations are always from a particular perspective. In this case, it's the perspective of someone who cares about the beauty and diversity of the historical life of a place. This method can never escape its initial perspective.
That sounds like a good thing, but prairies are very complex, so it seems unlikely that two people will think of it in quite the same way. Is there no truly objective way to look at it?
Not entirely, but when you go back and forth from part to whole many times, you have the chance to find agreement between the part and the whole. If we were simply accounting species or measuring board feet of timber in a stand of trees, then it could be objective. But that doesn't work with estimating complex things we can't directly measure, like quality or goodness.
So it's not perfect, but it seems to be the best we can do. Can you give me an example of how it works with plants?
Well, imagine someone like me noticed that certain plants came up in mammoth wallows.
Whoa, big fella, be careful where you wallow.
I might start to recognize a mammoth wallow from a distance by noticing mammoth plants. And then I refine the understanding of mammoth plants by visiting many wallows.
How about the snail species common in a wallow? I think we might have done a better job.
Each time I go from looking at a part to the whole and back again, I refine the number of species that are useful for identifying a wallow. After a few years, I have a better understanding of what wallows look like and which plant species are most characteristic of wallows.
And for our purposes, the wallow is a prairie, but we've added numbers, right?
Yes, and here's where we leave the circle of interpretation. After going back and forth between a prairie and species many times, experts attach a fixed number to a species indicating how conservative it is. These numbers are then used to calculate the quality of the site, just like our IQ example.
Wait a minute, who's the expert? Not me.
Well, that's good, isn't it? You eliminate the personal judgment of the person looking at the prairie.
Yes, but people using a system don't really learn anything about the plants other than the quality numbers already assigned, and what they learn about the site is determined by the numbers assigned to the species.
I see what you mean about learning, and I still think that turning a plant community of hundreds of species into a single number and calling that quality is too simple and subjective. But if I had to pick, I would think standardization is more important.
I'm with you, Robin.
If your goal is a standardized answer, that's fine. Just be aware of the danger. When we get to that final score, we shouldn't stop actively interpreting and learning and looking for other dimensions of quality.
Now I'm with you, Grog.
Maybe we're both right.
Maybe disagreeing isn't so bad if we just keep working toward a solution.
But what I was trying to do with that skit was really to question how we come up with goals in ecological restoration and what those goals are, and to first a quality assessment, which I've been using myself since the very early 90s when I first learned about it, makes sense to me. It's in some ways simply a quantification of what people have been doing for a long time before that, and that is anyone who becomes a reasonably good field botanist walks around in wheat fields and walks around in prairies and walks around in lots of landscapes somewhere between those two, and they recognize the prairie and they recognize a good prairie sort of intuitively by the plants that are present and the rare plants that are present they don't see any other places. They didn't put numbers on anything, they just recognized it. Certainly Ray Schulenberg and Bob Betts and Floyd Swink back in the day were recognizing really high quality prairie remnants. They didn't have any floristic quality assessment system. They simply saw them and recognized them and had in their own mind a sense of what were the really rare plants and what were the common ones. And so that's the floristic quality assessment system is just a way of, it's really it's a technique called ordination, and you just turn that you turn those into numbers. You turn those judgments into numbers, and then you do some calculations, and you generate a number, in this case, floristic quality for a place, whether it's a mean coefficient of conservatism or the floristic quality index itself, which is nothing wrong with that. It's quantifying and standardizing a way of thinking. But what it does do is that it stops you from thinking, or it doesn't require you to think. You simply accept this is an 8. This plant is an 8. And once you accept that numbering system, then you accept that the mean C in this place is a 4.7. And so I think that's one sense. When we asked you what a good prairie was, you came up with a lot of different answers to that prairie. What we use often, or at least one of the guiding tools we use in asking what a good prairie is a floristic quality assessment system, a little bit different than, a buggy prairie, or what, however many of you answered that question. So your answers together are a more complete, qualitatively complete answer to that question. The ones we often use and rely on in conservation are somewhat narrower. So I'm really trying to get you to think outside of the box that people like me and experts use, which is the forested quality assessment system. Not that there's anything really wrong with it, other than that there are many dimensions of quality it doesn't touch, and all of those other dimensions of quality are important too.
Any questions out there at this time, or do you want me to start the next video now?
Let's just start the next video.
Alrighty. One thing is still bugging me, Grog. I'm afraid we've already gone so far that there's no way back. Even if we get conservation right, things are moving too fast in the wrong direction to stop in time.
I'm scared.
I get it. There's a lot to worry about. Sixth mass extinction, climate change, ocean acidification. The list gets longer each day.
Makes me want to crawl under a rock sometimes.
Is there any hope?
I don't have any miracle answers. I think the situation is both better and worse than the apocalyptic predictions. In a very real sense, the sixth mass extinction has already happened. It's over, and you and I took part in it. Most of us live in landscapes that have already lost almost all of their former diversity of life, and we consider this poverty normal.
If that's the good news, what's the bad news?
Well, I'm not worried much about human survival as a species. We've traded the diversity of life for human convenience for centuries, and I have no doubt we can continue to do that for many generations to come. However, if we want to survive in a beautiful and diverse world, that trade-off is more threat than comfort.
Why do I feel like snails are being left out?
And hope?
My source of hope is the human spirit.
But experts call this the Anthropocene age because it's caused by people. How can you have faith in the human spirit?
All of us can be selfish and even ignore the direst warnings when it suits us, but that's not the limit of human sensibilities. People can also be selfless, compassionate, and courageous in their efforts to make the world a better place. I've known those people, and I've seen those efforts with my own eyes.
True, true, true.
What to do? Well, to begin with, conservationists need to accept part of the blame for not explaining ourselves well and clearly to the public, at least not well enough. And if we continue saying and doing the same things going forward, we should expect the same result.
But what am I supposed to say?
Great question. You and I both know how enormously inspiring and rewarding it is to be a conservationist.
Yes, there are bad days, but I still believe in the people who care, and I still believe in the cause.
And that is my source of hope.
So, do we need a better education?
Well, yes, if you mean teaching people more facts about nature, then we've been trying that for 100 years and fallen short. There are no magic facts, species lists, data sets, or analytical methods that will win the public over.
Then what?
We need to spread that belief and hope. We need to invent conservation communities where that belief and hope means something.
Sounds like love to me. To believe and hope in the face of all the problems requires love.
If you don't mind my saying, Pat, love is a private thing. You can't really teach it to people.
We don't need to teach it. People know how to love.
I'm getting lost here, Grog.
You doubt love because we live in a consumer society, and to producers and consumers, love means nothing. Among a group of friends or family, love means something. In a community of people who care about the world, love means something. Creating that community is the answer.
Okay, but transforming the culture of a nation seems absurd.
I wasn't referring to a nation, but to a small community that forms out of a common commitment to conservation.
But how can a small community make a difference?
Well, not a single small community, but many small communities. Maybe thousands of small communities.
Thousands?
Wait a minute, I remember something. It's from that poet guy, Wendell Berry. The question that must be addressed, therefore, is not how to care for the planet, but to care for each of the planet's millions of human and natural neighborhoods. Each of its millions of small pieces and parcels of land, each one of which is in some precious way different from all the others. What can accomplish this reduction? I will say again, without overweening hope, but with the certainty, nonetheless, that only love can do it. Only love can bring intelligence out of the institutions and organizations where it aggrandizes itself into the presence of the work that must be done. Love is never abstract. It does not adhere to the universe or the planet or the nation or the institution or the profession, but to the singular sparrows of the street, the lilies of the field, the least of these my brethren. Love is not by its own desire heroic, It is heroic only when compelled to be. It exists by its willingness to be anonymous, humble, and unrewarded. The older love becomes, the more clearly it understands its involvement in partiality, imperfection, suffering, and mortality. Even so, it longs for incarnation. It can live no longer by thinking, and yet for flesh to do the flesh's work, it must think.
Wow, I think I finally get it.
Maybe there is hope after all.
Hello. I've got a restoration day to go to.
I knew that. I knew that. I fall asleep at my desk all the time, so. I live upstairs. Nobody else is up there, so it's very quiet. The final quote by Wendell Berry, it sort of came about by chance. Basically, the script was written. I was reading a book of essays by Wendell Berry, and I hit this at the end of one of the essays, and it just jumped off the page at me, and I realized it was addressing exactly what I'd been talking about. I mean, so I decided there was no better way to finish the video than with Wendell Berry's words. As a poet, he says things better than most of the rest of us mortals can say. Again, my challenge, the thing I've challenged myself with, and what I would challenge you and every other conservationist with is how do you take an idea that all of us intuitively know is good? How do we grow the grow conservation as a whole? How do we grow that, not by 5%, but maybe by tenfold? How do we do that? If it makes so much intuitive sense to you and I, it can't. I think it is a true thing. It is a right thing, and we just simply have not explained it well to our fellow citizens, and we need to find better ways to do that. This is my way, or at least one pathway to try to do that. But we can't be content in doing the same things over and over and over again and think that marginal changes here and there, passing a referendum in a county, which has been a good thing recently for the conservation, but that's not the final answer. That's just one tiny, tiny little step, and we need to figure how to make many more steps like that. So that's my challenge to you. That's really what this video was about, was to challenge you with trying to maybe to trouble you slightly. The conservation, it's wonderful. I love the people I work with, whether they're volunteers or staff. I love the things I was doing. I was out with Lori Ryan yesterday, identifying plants and making species lists. There can't be anything more fun than that. But not to be content with that. How do we challenge ourselves to see this as a movement that can grow and should grow and will grow into the future? How do we get there? How do we do that? And this is simply one approach to doing that. You guys got any comments or questions? Anything you'd like to ask me? I can't.
You can type them in the chat or unmute. While you're typing, I do want to point out, this idea of conservation communities has come up a lot recently. So you may have seen, if you're on our restoration emails, our weekly emails, we're doing in collaboration with our steward communities in the Cary and Woodstock areas, conservation community events. So we're kind calling them like Cary Conservation Community and the Woodstock Preservation and Action groups. Or we're going to have a little bit of combination of staff going out with our stewards. Of course, we always have going on the communities that our stewards have grown naturally. I know some of you are on this call now, and you know, every time you go out, it's not just about clearing brush. It's not just about pulling garlic mustard. It's more the community of people that come sharing a snack and talking together and other aspects of that. But I am going to share another comment from the chat. So Christine and Dimitri shared that talked about changing culture if possible as well.
Glad you said that, because that's exactly the point I arrived at many years ago. But how do you operationalize that? And and I'm not saying it's the right way, the way I operationalize culture is a is a is a shared system of understandings and beliefs within a community of people. Um, and trying to change the culture of a nation seemed um, too much. But changing the culture of a small community seems very doable if they come together with a common cause. And it's by the growth of individual communities and by the multiplication of those communities, it seems to me eventually you can have an influence on that larger national culture. But I don't think you get there, and I'm sure this you probably all agree with me on this. I don't think there's any magical. There's no commercial you can run on television or on YouTube or whatever. Any 5-minute commercial that's going to, like, oh, I'll change everyone's mind and the nation will change in response to that. That's not going to work. I think small communities of people can come together with a common cause. And when they do that, they're creating a culture of caring. And those cultures of caring is what we need to do to multiply both the size and the number of those communities and eventually affect the whole society. That's that's it's one approach, but that's what I was trying to get at with this presentation today.
Another comment from Drew. It seems like the interest by individual homeowners to replace or supplement non-native landscaping with native plants, bushes, and trees is increasing. It seems like every additional person adds to a change in culture eventually.
I like that idea for two reasons. I like the culture aspect of it, and I guess implicit in what I've been saying, though maybe it wasn't explicit, is that conservation needs to escape the boundaries of dedicated natural areas. It can't stay inside of state parks and county forest preserves and conservation districts and national parks and wildlife refuges. If conservation is trapped in there, we're lost. Conservation needs to escape there and start living in the places where we live and work. And that's how conservation can grow. You can't expect the conservation district to buy up half the county or 2/3 of the county. It's not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. But conservation, the spirit of conservation, can escape the conservation district and live in the community around it. And that's how we need. That's what we need to try to get at over time. Is that the ethos, the spirit of conservation, and these little miniature cultures of conservation growing outside of uh, of dedicated natural areas. That's my hope for the future. And I think because that seems possible to me. It may be difficult to do, but I think it's possible.
Mm-hmm. And Kathleen, you've got your hand raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself and feel free to share your comment or question.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. It's a little quiet, so just speak up a bit.
So, Kathy Garnis here, and my collaborator, Dr. Gerald Wilhelm, agrees 100% with you. And he's often asked, why are the Christian is of faith not stepping up. Steve
If I heard the
Packer
question correctly, it's how can we get people of faith to step up? Is that
yes,
right?
Steve Packer talked about planting congregations of stewards everywhere. I taught Sunday school for 25 years, so I just speak this. I have a master's in theology. I have to speak this platform because that's what I'm trained to do. But it seems to me that's a huge under audience for work. Also, Tom, I saw Holy Grass, Kyra Chloe Odorata Saturday.
But I haven't. Oh, yes, that's. Uh, I've been seeing that on the Prairie Trail. I do my phenology route with several volunteers on the Prairie Trail every other week, so I've been enjoying that. Getting down on my hands and knees to smell it. Um, yeah, it's such a pretty little grass. Um, I think that I think there are many avenues. I think you know you talked about traditional religions. I think there is space for the conservation. This conservation, let's just call it an idea. This conservation idea, I think, should live inside of what we might call conventional religions, and I think it does to some extent. I'm I haven't seen it come completely to fruition. Perhaps in some Quaker concert communities, but I don't really know them very well. I don't think it's really come to fruition inside of traditional faith communities. I think it's possible, and I don't think there's one. This I think the idea of stewardship, in the sense that we think about it, within the sort of the boundaries of established natural areas, I think is a really positive thing. I've always said I think ecological restoration got its start within groups of volunteers working and trying to save things. And it's been institutionalized and it's grown, and that's all for the good. But I think communities outside of that, communities that are potentially groups of farmers who come together and realize that there's something more to farming than production. That there could be groups of homeowners in a suburb that come together and form a community and change the values that they apply to their landscapes. These are the sorts of things that I think are possible, and each one of those communities will be different from the other, and they may look at conservation slightly differently, but that's all for the good. I think we need to explore a lot of different avenues for conservation and not restrict ourselves. I love my volunteers with the conservation district, and I enjoy working with them. That's one model, or that can be one model of community, but there should be many other models of community that we're experimenting with and allowing to grow and propagate in the society at large.
We had a couple other folks say in the chat. You stated about hope, and that is what I can think about someday for the hollows and what we monitor. When I see Barbara Key and monitoring at places like Silver Creek, there's so many beautiful things growing there. And Christine also shared the Homegrown National Park campaign may be familiar to some. So there definitely are things going on already, and it's partially a matter of us communicating where those are and sharing with people and figuring out the best way to share, I think.
Well, I think
Where are we?
part of what I was talking about today, I think, is already happening. I think even because I think there are an awful lot of people out there who do care about these things and who do work with each other toward those solutions. So I don't think I'm inventing something out of nothing here. I think it's probably already happening. I've probably been only aware of a small part of that. Um, for me, one of the I think it was a lot. One of the lines in this. And I want to say this before we finish today. Um, if you ask, I suspect any one of you, I know every time I've talked with a fellow conservationist, restorationist, people I'm working with, whether I ask them directly or it simply comes up in conversation, you hear a story about what brought them to that day and that moment and the things that, in that case, we were doing together. Every time it's a story. It's a story about their introduction to nature, to conservation, to trees, to streams, to being outdoors. Every time it's a story, and when they tell the story, you can tell it's a story. Use that word again. It's a story of love, how it's growing inside of them for this world around them, and they're discovering it and discovering that it eventually becomes really a part of who they are as a person. What you never hear um, from someone when you ask them why they're a conservationist, they're not a conservationist because they want to sequester carbon. I'm not saying it's not important, it's incredibly important, but that's not the reason they became a conservationist. And yet, we as conservationists too often explain ourselves and explain the importance of conservation when we're confronted. We use these rational economic arguments because we're just used to talking that way. We all grew up in a consumer society and we're used to that's the way everyone values everything, right? But that's not the reason why anyone's going to join us in sharing our love for nature in one way or another is why people will join us. Recently, in several different contexts, I've remembered just teachers that I've had in my life who were just incredibly important at critical times in my life to redirecting the way I thought about the world around me and my relationship to it. Um, uh, we all have that responsibility to be that person for other people. Um, um, that's how the conservation community at large grows is by by allowing people to fall in love with nature. Each of them maybe in a slightly different way. All we can do is our best in terms of putting them in contact with nature. But that that is the heart of conservation, and I think we keep that heart hidden. We're slightly embarrassed about it, and so we always give rational economic answers when we're confronted with the value of conservation, which is all well and good up to a point, but it really doesn't get to the heart of why people do it and why other people might join us. So,
Christine had her hand raised, so go ahead and unmute yourself.
I have two things. The first one I'm going to piggyback or mention something Tom just talked about. um, I think of it about the emotional connection or, getting folks to love it. And I think of when you talk to kids and say, instead of like, what did you learn about this problem with 2 + 2 or something? And I've steer away from the answer and then focus on like, how did you feel when you finished? And I could think of that like getting them to feel an interest in learning or an interest in doing something positive, or the process of the learning. And I could see that being applicable in conservation in some way, if it's stewardship or when we're doing nature hikes with kids or any person really. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, um, it got me excited that we're talking about this topic, and then I wanted to share what not just the conservation district is doing, and it was not my idea, but I'm part of this Pollinator Week, which is in June 22nd, is the last day. We have reached out, and it's people from all over in the McHenry County community that are in conservation. It's non-for-profits and other organizations. We reached out to libraries, and we got 12 in the county for that week to do some presentations on pollinators. And what makes me excited about that is it's not our traditional clientele or participants. I'm hoping that will attend these because we're going to go to them. So that's something exciting about. So if you are in McHenry County or not, and you want to look up at that event, that's Pollinator Week, and it's in our landscapes. I know I'm making a plug, but it's also I think for a good reason. It's on topic with what we're discussing, and I'm excited about it, and gives me some hope for this coming June, and see what changes can come of that.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions or comments, Jackie?
Nothing in the chat so far,
Okay.
so I think
All
we're
right.
okay to
Well,
wrap up.
Okay.
Well, hey, Tom
Well,
and Jackie.
yeah.
Sorry
Yes.
about that. We got one more question from Dimitri.
Sure.
Let us know if you can't hear him.
So if the goal is to recreate pre-European settlement conditions to the best of our ability within the natural areas, how does that relate to animals that we potentially drove to extinction recently, such as the passenger pigeon, or perhaps substitute species that could fulfill a similar ecological niche? Is that a desirable goal, or would that do more harm than good?
So I'll take the kind of a two-part question there. I think when the pre-European settlement is as I think that term seems narrow. I sort of try to confront that in the presentation, that pre just means before. It doesn't mean the year before, it means before. And so we're really trying to understand, as we're trying to restore ecosystems, we're trying to understand what it is we're trying to restore. There's no way we can come to a complete understanding of the past without a time machine to go back and study it. So we're trying to understand the past as we try to restore it. There's no other way to do it. We know some basic things. We're pretty sure of what were the native plants and animals of our region. We don't know exactly how to put them all back together. Again, the remnants give us clues, but they're not complete stories, not complete narratives of a historical past that we've lost. We have to build that understanding over time. So that's part of the answer. So when we say pre-European settlement, it's really referring to really the time before us, because that tells us about our own ecological impact as a society. The other one is about de-extinction. I believe that was your comment about passenger pigeons, and there are in New Zealand, they're talking about I think it's called the thylacine, the marsupial wolf, bringing that back from extinction. There are people talking about bringing mammoths back from extinction. De-extinction is a question is to me very closely related to restoration. I think it's a sort of a sidebar. I think it might be an interesting topic for that, maybe for the few other ideas for a separate talk coming up. I would only say that I think de-extinction is a fascinating topic. It's one about which there is a lot of disagreement today. If you quote unquote, bring the passenger pigeon back? Have you really created a passenger pigeon or simply something that looks like it that shares some of the passenger pigeon's genes? I don't know that I know the answer to that question. I think we're probably going to start to, I think people will probably start to experiment with these ideas over the next few decades for well or ill. So we all need to give that quite a bit more thought. So thanks for the question, Dimitri. I think it is it's a question that's hanging out there that will become a really important question in I think the next decade. Um, so thanks for asking it. And but I don't think I want to go down that rabbit hole right now. That's an important but very deep rabbit hole. So I'll leave that one for now.
Okay, this is the last call for any questions. And I know we love having these types of discussions. I know even though the Weekend of Restoration event ended, this is kind of a similar feel to it. So you see these little elements pop up in other things that we do. So I just want to thank Tom again for his expertise and his bringing philosophy and emotion into something that we're all kind of taught that we're supposed to remove that from sometimes. So
Yes, I want to thank all of you for attending today. I've really enjoyed the discussion afterward. That's really, I think, what I enjoy most about teaching is getting to that point of actually talking to people. I used to torment my interns for years with challenging them with ideas like this, trying to put them in the position of facing some of these important questions. And I always enjoyed the conversations that came out of that. Christine was one of my interns, so she's been tortured already. Anyway, thank you very much for attending today.
and this will be posted hopefully within a day or two on our Discover at DiscoverMCCD YouTube channel under the Tom Talks playlist. There are a variety of other presentations under there. You're welcome to peruse at any time. And thanks for coming. Have a great day.